one of the things that really sucks about a panel, something that is not good about a panel, is that we stand here as experts and you sit in a classroom as students. The research would suggest that if this was a normal classroom, this would not be the best teaching method at all. That the days of the expert on the stage filling the glass of wisdom in each one of you is well and truly gone. And now that the teacher is more the mentor, the facilitator, the guide, the person who challenges you. So, to help us do this, Worlddiac is looking at how we do a panel. So, our experts will introduce themselves to you in a moment. Two of them have a little presentation that they will do. But we're allowed to not interrupt, but we're allowed to find good spots to stop and ask the questions. Okay? I have a microphone, I will give it to you. You will ask questions. If no one wants to ask questions, I will then come to you and give you the microphone and say, ask a question. Okay? So we really do want you to join with us and participate, because we believe that the best way for you to learn is to be part of the conversation more than anything else. Okay. So, in all this, Rebecca, Steve, and Steve. Fairly easy to remember. Yeah. Okay, so firstly, please join with me in welcoming them. Being here. And you have 90 seconds to introduce yourself. Steve.
I'm Steve number 1. I'm Steve number 2. So I'm the president of Worlddiac, and this session is, as president of Worlddiac, we work with Tony also as well, but I also am president of LabTech International, which is based in Asia. So we become involved in education transformation for many years. Thank you so much.
So I'm actually Stephen, not Steve, so that's another differentiator. So don't often get called Steve, I guess, because I'm English, I don't know whether that's got something to do with it. But, so yeah, I'm the Chief Education Officer for Numaginist School. Numaginist School is an educational system more than a school in terms of wanting to transform education internationally. I've been in the Middle East for 13 years, working for large organisations, in and across schools on all aspects of school improvement. So I've seen a lot of challenges, but I've also seen some good things too. So happy to share some thoughts and take any questions from today's panel. Looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Rebecca One, and I travel and work with teachers and in schools with students from pre-K through PhD. I've taught them all, I teach teachers, and I know what it is to have to keep the place going no matter what happens. When the computer doesn't work, you go back to your own stories. So I work a lot around the world, and I want to talk about some new ideas I have for engaging students with filming, which is part of their vocabulary today. They help write, they help produce, but we lead them. So we'll talk about these new vocabularies and activities that define EdTech in a slightly different way, where it actually uses high level, not just YouTube things, but high level film. They work collaboratively and they work at telling great stories of interest to them about their place. Think global or global.
Okay, so any questions to start with? I've got 100, but I'm going to... Right, Rebecca has the microphone, So I'll ask the first question. My question is to the three panellists. What will education look like in 10 years' time? Now, the reason I ask that is because you will come from various backgrounds. Some of you will be teachers, some of you will be manufacturers, some of you will be distributors. If you can understand what education is going to look like in 10 years' time, you have an advantage. Rebecca or Stephen or Steve, who would like to go first?
Well, thank you for that question, Tony. I asked myself that question 10 years ago also, and 10 years prior to that, and 10 years prior to that. I've been working in international education for 40 years. And for me, I'm a futurist and I'm an optimist. I would love to say something revolutionary, and we're trying to work for revolutionary change, but also getting education to change is like moving population. It is really, really tough, and finding those points which can change education universally around the world is there's no universal either. So I think education is changing. I'm more excited about it than ever. What we can accomplish, what we do, there's a lot more tools and to actually fundamentally change. And education has been the stubborn outlier in our society to change. Industry is changing quickly. Society is changing quickly. Education is lagging far behind. There's a huge resistance to change. I think it's partly our system and our structure in many countries that prevents it from changing fast enough. Education systems seem they're designed to preserve the status quo rather than to keep up with society. They have been slow adopters of technology and change. Industry has changed much faster. The medical industry is changing very quickly. And I think that's a good example. Education has pockets of change, but it's not uniform. So I think it's waiting for that transformation. I'd like to see it, say in the next 10 years, we will cross that bridge and we will actually realize the ideas and the potential that's useful. I think to do that, all of us need to work together to push for that change. So 10 years' time, my best guess would be there will be some countries that change, there will be some institutions that change. Some of them may become unrecognizable to what they are today, but the majority, I think, is still going to look a lot like it does today. There's more places that are slower to change, so they'll be starting to change. I think it's maybe 20 years later that we will actually have more transformation. So that's my best guess right now. Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, I do a lot of leadership training actually, and I kind of ask the question as well, is like, imagine yourself in 10 years' time. What would the person in 10 years' time want to say to you right now? And that actually gives you a context of maybe making some choices for you right now for the next 10 years. Education, I agree with Steve, we kind of like have a situation at the moment where we've got school, which is kind of the 18th century stagecoach, now being pulled by the technology, which is kind of like a jet engine. And so ultimately, if we actually put the jet engine on full throttle, the stagecoach is just going to fall to bits. So we're dumbing down the technology to try and fit into a system that actually needs to be updated. So ultimately, our education system, in my opinion, is broken. It's not meeting the young people's needs of the future, especially when it comes to the skills that young people are going to need in terms of grit, perseverance, resilience, leadership. And ultimately, I think good or outstanding schools are taking outdated curriculums and doing a very good job and ripping them apart and delivering a good standard of education. I think 10 years is a short period of time in education. So again, like Steve, I don't see that much change other than obviously New Nordic School with our transformative system hopefully being at the cutting edge of where schools will be in 10 years' time. I think the question for you as educators or whatever field you're in is how are you going to future-proof yourself to be able to meet those changes in 10 years' time? What changes can you do now in your environment that you can control? Yeah, it's about controlling the things that you can control and need to put into place. Will we have schools with bricks and mortar in the future? Will it be fully online? Will there be this hybrid model of learning? I think all of those will be in operation, but again, I think there won't be one universal, one-size-fits-all across the in an international context. But I think as an educator, you need to think, where are you going to be? What contribution can you make in terms of where you fit into what you're doing? So I think that certainly curriculums will need to be changed. Technology is going to play an ever-increasing role, and ultimately that's going to be more focused on the personalisation of learning, so students can take more control of their learning, and so learning is more purposeful for them, so it has more meaning for them. And that's what ultimately we're trying to do. We hear this phrase around teachers being facilitators of learning. I think teachers will become activators of learning. They're going to activate the learning that actually technology will take more routine tasks away from them. So they're going to need to be those activators of learning. And this partnership between technology, teacher and student will become ever more important.
Thank you.
All right, I'm a teacher, so I don't sit still when I talk. I wander around the classroom in workshops with all ages, because one of the things that I think about those of us that are teachers or administrators, we forget what it's like to be in something we don't know. We teach the same thing, and we know we're comfortable, and for our learners, it's not comfortable, so we have to learn to be uncomfortable however much we don't like it. So I turn the field of mathematics upside down, asking questions like, what is math? Where did it come from? Why in the world are we studying this? Okay? And as a PhD in the field that's taught every level from pre-K to PhD, I start with the basics and find out what you want to know. Because if you don't really understand why the kids are there, or how the kids being a word of all ages, then why are you teaching them? Why are you mentoring them? Why are you telling them stories? And I use storytelling and have for 40 years to make it meaningful. So, how do we do that? What is math? It was developed by humans to describe the world. It was a communication. It wasn't worksheets. It wasn't practice over and over again. It was to help understand what the world was about. And most of the time, it was not a place value system. It was a counting-based system. It was measurement. It was geometry. We ignore most of those visual stories. So one of my favorite things to do with even adults, and I'm going to do it with 200 teachers in Botswana at the end of March, we are going to measure people's feet. Not with a ruler, which people will want to bring out, because when you have a ruler, you concentrate on the actual numbers on the ruler. I want you to understand relative scale, regardless of what the scale is more fundamental. So you can take this home, older children, younger children, parents, measure my foot compared to your foot, and you're ready with fractions without even thinking about it. Because if your foot is longer than mine, and mine's the unit of measurement, you know how many more of yours, how many more of mine are in your foot, and then you can change the unit to the longer one and say, how many of my feet are in yours, and you're set up with fractions the way the Egyptians did it many, many centuries ago. I think education in the future needs to learn from the history, not from the textbooks. When I started teaching 50 years ago, because I just turned 70, when I was 20, I was thrown in a classroom because a teacher got sick. I had no training except that I was a top student in math. And I said to the students, what is math to you? What do you think they said? Heavy books, boring, read all kinds of worksheets. I said, close the books. I want to know, because 50 years ago, I are 15 years of age don't know about a lot of things like finance and so on, so you bring that in. But they like to make clothes, they want to play football, they want to learn how to draw, and every day they talk a little bit about their interests. And my role as a mentor was to help them understand how math would be helpful to their interest. That was 50 years ago. I don't think we've moved that far, but I keep pushing for those kinds of stories. I want you to think about how to mentor your students into what they might, questions they are going to have to address in their life. And we don't know. When I was teaching one place about careers, and I walked in on the panel, and we were in a room where all the technology was. And I said, there's one thing similar to when I was your age. There was one girl in the room. With all the rest were boys. I said, that's the only thing alike. The toys are all different. And when you're my age, the toys will again be all different. And we don't know what they're going to look like. But what we need to know is we're humans. And we're going to evolve, and we need to work together. I've also run a large research firm, which is the same thing as teaching, where I ran big international projects, rarely done by a quantitative person, but I'm a storyteller, first and foremost. And I learned how little people had learned about how to, in fact, work together, be a part of a team, be able to take criticism, and learn from it. I'm also an inventor, and I have learning tools that are far-fetched for me because they take you out of your comfort zone. But that's how you become a great leader. Your students of all ages have questions you've never thought about. So you need to listen to their questions and try and help them, guide them, facilitate them in understanding where they're going. That's where I think education needs to go for sure.
Thank you. Worlddiac is taking no responsibility at all for people who do their back while they're trying to video Rebecca. Because it's pretty hard. I saw people doing all sorts of things trying to follow her around. We are taking no responsibility, no chiropractic fees, nothing at all, okay? Right, I want to add a little bit to that because I also have some opinions, and that's why I'm here. I want to say to you, let's have a look at history of education just very quickly and say to you that schooling as we have it now is about 250 years old, no more. Schooling as we have it now is a response of the Industrial Revolution of the 1700s. At that time in our history, we needed our students to learn how to use machines. And those machines were a process line. So schooling automatically became a process and a process line. Before that, schooling was very different. Schooling happened in communities. Schooling happened at the village well. Schooling happened down in the corner because the guy who knew physics lived in that street. Teachers were parents, were the smart person down the road, was the woman that was doing the washing. Education existed because of communities. Communities in our history are 30,000 years old. So schooling itself has been very different to what we have now. So it's important as you listen to these people and you try and replace your thinking with their thinking and then decide where you want to go, is to understand that there is a history in our profession that has not always been what it is now. Does that make some sort of sense to you? Okay, deep breath. Would someone like to ask a question at this stage of any of our panelists? Please, would someone like to ask a question of any of our panelists? Good lady, absolutely.
My name is Meta Mansouri. I'm math teacher for 10 years. I teach for 4 and 5 grade. I like what you say, Miss. And we start with math like your ways of teaching math. But now with the new policy and the new books, but it's heavy and we should follow the planning, we should follow basic chart. I cannot give the student the meaning of the math clearly. How can we deal with the heavy book, basic chart and planning? I use Keegan strategy when I teach, and all the time I start my lesson by let's play. This is my lesson. And every day my students ask me, Miss, when do we start studying? This is our study. Playing is our study. So sometimes we face a problem with the admin.
I think you place it. It's a big issue. And I think a couple little tricks that I have to tell teachers is that what it means is you have the families where they go in the evening. I create homework, which is not the regular worksheets for them to do there. I create activities like measuring the feet of everyone they live with. And then they can watch it from the beginning of the school year. If they have a very young sister or brother or cousin, they will notice rate of change. If you measure everybody's foot, and maybe they love to measure their own height if they're young, but you measure everybody's foot in the household at the beginning of the school year, you do it mid-year, 6 months later, and you compare how they've changed, and then you do them at the end, and they do it at where they live, because you can facilitate those home activities and not interfere with what you're doing in the day. So I'm very big on the films, the stories are things that can go to the home, not just have to interrupt the day because of those restrictions you have. But add as much of your personality to the teaching as you possibly can. You are the mentor, not the book, not the computer, not the internet. You have to help them know what to do with all this stuff in front of them. And you need to be an adult, which if they're young, they want. They may say they don't, but they want guidance. So that's my clue, to do activities they can then do at home with the people they live with of all ages.
Thank you. Another question?
I've listened to all of you and I've thought a lot about what I'm going through. I'm like, so I work in GESS Dubai. I'm in the makerspace, design technology. Basically, I think is like future of education now, right? In terms of innovation, design. But we focus a lot on sustainability. So that's kind of what I was wondering in terms of what you're bringing to the table in terms of what is sustainability. I know you travel all over the world, you work with different types of communities that do work in their natural environment, right? That's kind of like what I was gathering in terms of your travel, right, Rebecca?
I work in schools a lot.
Right. Okay.
No matter where it is.
Right. So you've seen so much all over the world and how people are incorporating the environment and what they're doing. Right. And obviously technology plays a big part in how much technology we don't have. But I guess I want something from you today that I can't find on like a TED Talk or on YouTube, like all the other kids right now.
What does sustainability mean to you? Yeah, right.
Sustainability is naturally, like it doesn't have an environmental, obviously, definition for me. It's more about, it's, sustainability is how much of the environment, but also sustainability is how we're people at the end of the day, our wellness and our health. So, yeah, I guess.
I'm going to let you guys have a go at this. In our previous session, we had Dr. Mohammed from Egypt, who was actually an expert in sustainability. And the thing that he honed to us for the
Students actually find a person, find a passion that they want to solve. They don't necessarily solve poverty or sustainability, but they learn how to learn, to do something that drives them. So there's real purpose to learning. So we feel that our curriculum is kind of addressing, I guess, some of those needs that are out there, but also it's driving the learning within the students' own passion to want to shape their own future as well.
Okay, I'm going to invite Stephen Mckee to the podium now, and he's going to give a 10-minute or so presentation. As he's getting himself organised, so you're going to go that way, yeah? As he's getting himself organised, I want to tell you a little story about mathematics as we build into this. And to those who were in the last session, my apologies. I want to just tell you something that I was taught by a young lady. Her name was Jenny. She was this high. It was in my first year of teaching. So that makes it about 40 years ago, because I'm much younger than you, but only a little bit. I was teaching algebra, right? Jenny was 10 years old. So we were doing 4 plus x equals 7. So x equals 3. Yeah, happy with that? And then we were doing x times 2 equals 10. So x would equal 5. Yeah. Right. So Tony, the new teacher, has the little group on the floor. We did this. And then I said to the group, I want you to go back to your desk, open your exercise book. I think it was on page 72, and you'll find that there are questions A, B, C, D, E, F, all the way to S. I would like you to do them for me, and in 15 minutes we will correct them. Okay? Got the story? Young Jenny, remember this is my first year teaching, looks at it, looks at me, looks at it again, and walks up to me. And I've never forgotten this. What she said to me was, they become harder, each one. A, B, C, D. So S is the hardest. I said, yes, that's correct. So she said to me, well then I'll do S and get it correctly. Why do you want me to do the other ones? Okay? The learning there for me was huge. I had not aimed my mathematics teaching at her. She didn't need to practice 3 plus x equals 7. She needed to be challenged. She needed to be pushed out there. I probably now as a teacher think, why the hell was I teaching algebra to start with? But the learning there for me was very, very much around how do we look at individual needs and individual children. Without further ado, Steve, you're very welcome, so thank you.
That's a really good one to build off of. Thank you so much, Tony. Great story. A couple of years ago, I was doing a workshop in Malaysia, and we had a teacher there that raised a question as we're talking about 21st century learning and using technology for teaching and learning. This is a little bit better now, clearer voice. So the teacher in Malaysia, one of the countries that we work with, I live in Indonesia, by the way, and it's been my base for the last 30 years. But LabTech, we work in 80 countries around the world, and Worlddiac, of course, is global. So the teacher said, our problem here in Malaysia is that we have 18th century classrooms. You know, we have 19th century teachers, but we have 20th century, and this is a few years ago, 20th century students. You know? And so it shows, and we're thinking that the schools had not progressed up to the level of the teachers had not adapted themselves to the students. And and I think there's a lot of truth to there, and what Tony and also Rebecca talked about in this is that, you know, Tony talked about the history of learning. Learning is a one-on-one thing originally, learning is something that we do from one person to the next. And it's not done normally in a group, you know, for most of our existence. It's father to child, it's mentor to novice, and it's been organized like this, like what Rebecca does. Ask these provocative questions, get the person to think, organize their thoughts, shape their thinking. This is almost what you might call the Socratic method. And that is the classic method of good learning. And that hasn't changed for a long time. It existed before Socrates, and it exists after him too as well. Now what we've done, as Tony mentioned, with this industrialization of learning, mass learning, learning for all, we've tried to shoehorn this good learning practice into a foreign structure and environment to mass produce it. And there we've gone to teaching to the common denominator. The class is group learning, as group learning. When we have group learning, we're teaching to the average. And so the group in the middle is getting it, but the slow learners are lost and the fast learners are bored. And as Tony's case, that girl, she knew this thing, she wanted to jump to the end, but Tony was teaching to the average. He was teaching to the common denominator. And, you know, most people are outliers, one way or the other, to the common denominator. So I think the challenges that we have in the future are, we're changing again, and this issue of technology, using new technology for teaching and learning, we're facing the same situation. How do we adapt good learning practices and take advantage of this new technology? This is rising to a new type of pedagogy. Some say that pedagogy is evolving more like andragogy, which is how adults learn. Adults are more self-directed, and you find that now in younger and younger students, like Tony's example. Yeah, the girl knew what she wanted, and she got Tony to conform to that, you know, and he did, because he's a good teacher. There's also a new term that's come out, heutagogy. Heutagogy is even beyond andragogy, and this is where students are identifying what they want to learn. You're using their motivation, and then they are using many tools at their disposal. And so technology is now trying to look at that new style of teaching and learning. But we have a real problem in the way that teachers prepare. You know, I think that change is, I talked about change a little bit before. We do, and Steve number 2, or Stephen, mentioned that in the way that technology is being used, that we need to look at the systemic change in teaching. Teachers are part of it, the system is part of it. Questioning what we learn, when we learn it, how we learn it. I think maths is a very good example of this. A lot of people question the structure of maths, that we go up and we go into algebra, we go into geometry, and then we go into trigonometry, we go into calculus, and the further up we go, the further removed that the average person needs those skills. And so why are we spending so much time on the things that people don't need to learn? Now these are questions. I do a presentation, I'm not going to go through many slides now, I'm getting organized. But this is one of the reasons that Worlddiac exists, to have this dialogue that we're doing, because education should change, needs to change, and we're involved in the middle of this. In fact, our main purpose here is where education comes together. And this is a good example of what we're doing here, to try to make connections, to improve methodologies, to further technological development, to stimulate the dialogue of what is happening around the world. And Worlddiac has many activities around the world. We have members from 40 different countries on 5 continents. And our next signature event is going to be, in Bern, Switzerland, on November 4th to 6th. And we have a very, very special session of conferences that are going on there, which you're all invited to. Rebecca, you would find it fascinating. Steve also would find it fascinating. And this is what we call, one more back. We're having a technological break. Can we go back? One more. Go back one more. No, there's something before that. Should be something before that. No, the other way. Okay, now we're too far forward. Okay, anyway. So, it's called Future Talk. And in Future Talk, there's going to be 3 days of conferences around different themes about how education is changing. I think this is very, very important. And we need to share this dialogue around the world. I would invite you all to look at the Worlddiac website, which is worlddidac.org. Take a look at this. Not only companies can be members, but we're opening this up to institutions and individuals as well. And so to push the needle of education change around the world, we are trying to help facilitate and communicate best practices. Where are these pockets of inspiration happening? As we mentioned, it's not happening equally all over the world. But just because you haven't yet changed your system much doesn't mean you can. I think there are going to be cases of countries that are going to leapfrog. Sometimes the countries at the upper level are the most difficult to change. So the country that has the least to lose is more willing to change. You're going to Botswana, for example. I know Botswana well. I spent 3 years in Botswana in the 1970s. I built some of the very first schools that the government was built. At the time I arrived, there was only schools run by missionaries. It was a very, very interesting time, so I hope that you have there. Countries can leapfrog in technology. I think technology will help us to do that, to reach more people. It's my hope that we can use this new framework of learning to get back to good learning practices, to tailor learning to the individual, to have differentiated learning, to assist the teacher to still reach large groups of people, but within a variety of ways and means, and not linear learning. I think one of the things we're starting to talk about, the difference is that we need non-linear learning. And this is what Rebecca does in one-on-one, right? Don't we need that? Non-linear learning. And the learning pathway for each person is different. It's individual. It matches what we know, what we're interested in, and where we want to go. And it will be the most expedient pathway for us to get there. But bulk learning, mass learning does not do that at this point. But with the new technologies, we can actually try to do this. And my own company is involved in this. We think about this a lot. We're at actually with G54. We do a program called Virtual TVET. And here we're using 3D gaming technology and using game tools to teach technical subjects. And we do non-linear learning because game platform is actually very, very useful. It's gameplay. If anybody of you are gamers and have played virtual and video games, they're non-linear now. They started out as linear, but it's boring. Just like linear learning is boring, linear games are boring too, because they're very predictable and they don't do what you want. You want something that's flexible and adapts to your needs. So I'm going to end with one thing, coming back to your question, what sustainability was, and that's why I want to ask this. I totally am supportive of green initiatives in education. We do need to save the planet, it's true. And this could be built into many, many subjects. But for me, I always think of sustainable education as one that prepares the student for the future. And it's sustainable for their own life, their own career. And in a day of uncertainty, as technology advances in the workplace, there are many studies now that are saying that today we're teaching the students, and when they graduate 10 years or 5 years from now, 50% of the jobs will not exist out there. So how do you teach kids today for jobs you don't even know will exist tomorrow? And this is a big challenge because in curriculum development, you look at, in the academic, you're looking at subject content that may not change. But in vocational technical, we actually look at jobs, and then we figure out how to prepare the student for that job. We identify the characteristics of jobs, the technology they need to master, and we make a system program for them. It's logical, but how do you do that if you don't know what the job is? If it doesn't exist, you can't profile it. So we have an uncertainty of what we're preparing for, and I think the common answer to that is we prepare the kids to be flexible. We prepare them to learn how to learn, to ask questions, to gather resources, and this is good learning tools. We give them the tools to continue learning because we cannot teach them everything. We don't know everything. and we don't know things that we don't know, and we don't know things that will be in the future. So we have to prepare them for that, and that to me is sustainability. If we can do that for the individuals, then we don't have to worry about it. They can take care of themselves and they can continue learning. And that's lifelong learning. There's been a lot of lip service to lifelong learning and everyone says, but unless we practice that in